Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 7th session of Culture Dose, Art for Wellbeing. My name's Danielle Galotta from the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and I'm the Access Programs producer. We'll start off by an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Black Dog Institute stands. We acknowledge the Gadigal and Bidigal peoples of the Eora Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Again, we welcome past participants to our online program and anyone who is experiencing Culture Dose for the first time. As you may be aware, Culture Dose is a fortnightly art experience where you're invited to take time out for yourself to connect with art, your feelings, thoughts, and imagination. In each session, we focus on 3 works from the collection of the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And in our experience here, we provide an opportunity for you to slow down and create a space for you to look and observe, imagine, and read and respond with your body to these artworks. I'm now going to introduce my co-host, Professor Catherine Boydell.
Thank you, Danielle, and hello, everyone. I also would like to extend a warm welcome and thank you for joining our 7th session of our fortnightly noon sessions of Culture Dose. As Danielle mentioned, I'm Catherine and I'm at the Black Dog Institute. And my program of research is very much aligned with what we're doing in Culture Dose. I focus on using the arts in the research process, both to create or produce research data and to communicate or share research findings using visual, performative, and literary genres. Culture Dose is based on the Arts on Prescription program, which is a collaboration between Danielle and the Art Gallery of New South Wales and myself and Black Dog Institute. And our research exploring the impact of the Arts on Prescription program showed significant increases in mental health and well-being, in sense of community inclusion and connectedness. And based on these positive findings, we decided to extend the arts engagement to the broader public in the form of Culture Dose. I'd also like to take the opportunity to share with you, for those who are new to Culture Dose, that our arts engagement program was featured on ABC National Radio's All in the Mind program last month, where Danielle and I and a couple of participants from our Arts on Prescription trial spoke with Lynn Elcom about the arts engagement program. And they also produced a podcast on one of Culture Dose's earlier sessions that some of you may have participated in, where the focus was on Henri Fanton-Latour's work, Flowers and Fruit. So it's very nice to see that it's getting some publicity. I'm going to be moderating the discussion this afternoon, so please ensure that your video and microphone are off during the session. You'll be invited to share your responses in the chat box. You'll see that you have the option of responding only to the panelists, Danielle and I, or to all attendees if you want the entire group to view your comments. We also suggest you might want to have a pencil, pen, or other materials present during the session in case you'd like to draw a doodle and engage in any other creative activity during the session. Now, Danielle will talk a little bit more about the title of the 7th session, Connection with Place, which I think is really important in these times, the importance of our social place and space and what that means to us. So to prepare for the session, I'd like to engage you in a very brief meditative exercise. So if you could begin by bringing your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. You can begin to notice your body seated wherever you're seated, feeling the weight of your body on the chair or on the floor. Take a few deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath, bring in more oxygen, enlivening the body. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor, the weight and pressure. vibration, heat. You can notice your legs against the chair, pressure, pulsing, heaviness, lightness. Notice your back against the chair. Bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensation in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Let them be soft. Relax. Soften your jaw. Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then notice your whole body present. Take one more breath. Be aware of your entire body as best you can. Take a breath. And then, when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Thank you, Catherine. Our focus today will be on a connection to place. We're going to explore how an artist may have a direct experience, such as a walk through the Australian bush or a stroll by the beach to awaken innermost affinities with nature. Through looking, understanding light and colour, to then processing ideas and feelings into a form of expressive communication. The selection of artworks today invite us to observe closely, to reflect on our senses, and to become aware of moments where we experience the natural environment and have a personal connection with places. In particular, with our program today, as Catherine has led us through the transition, is to be mindful of our breath as we view these works and imagine walking through the particular landscape that is before us. We invite you to survey the artwork, to look into the distance of this panoramic landscape. We are approaching a track in the Australian bush. We are present in the foreground, where there are low shrubs, grasses, rocks, and even it appears a fallen trunk of a tree. As you step into the painting, and the more you look, the more you will see and observe. You'll be struck by the texture of the foliage, the different tones of green. You'll notice an olive green, the green of eucalyptus trees, a sap green, and even specks of an emerald green. And the way the artist has rendered the foliage provides us with texture and interest. In the foreground, you'll be struck by the lone eucalyptus tree, growing tall and being young. And through the branches, we still see that sky. In the middle ground, we travel down through the valley and we look out across the harbour to the skyline of Sydney. We invite you to take focus on the sky. Almost half this landscape is the sky. For you, is this an early sunrise? Or is it perhaps a later sunset? You will notice the tones of mauve, ochre, pale pink that transition through the sky and provide us with a particular atmosphere.
We have a comment that it looks like city smog.
Potentially it could be city smog. It'd be interesting to gauge whether people think it's a sunrise or a sunset, with those very subtle tones that are coming through the sky and that almost dappled light.
Someone's guessing sunrise, and someone else sees sunset. Another sunrise, sunset. Sunrise tends to have a bit more blue.
Again, when we invite you to survey these works and in a way delve into your imagination, for you, if it's a sunrise or a sunset in this moment, as we read these works with our body and take note of our breath, we imagine our body walking through this landscape. I want you to imagine what it would feel like, the sounds you would hear, the crunch of dry bush leaves, perhaps the sound of birds, and perhaps even what you would smell. The smell of the Australian bush, which is so unique. In this landscape, we also look across, as I mentioned, Sydney Harbour, and we see the light reflecting upon the water. And we almost get a reflection of a glass-like surface, clear and reflective. You may also notice that there is a figure in the middle ground. The figure is looking out into the water, perhaps also taking note of the changing atmosphere, the movement of the clouds, and being present in the environment. Feeling the breeze, smelling the air, enjoying the bliss of space, colour, texture, and the diversity of the Australian bush.
We have a few more comments, Danielle. The lone figure emphasizes the isolation, says Michael. We have someone who sees, Catherine sees a three-masted ship out in the distance.
That may give a sense of perhaps a time that we're looking at. And I think that lone figure also is a reference to that idea of the sublime, that when we're in nature, the awe of nature is overwhelming and quite beautiful. And as an individual, we are part of that landscape and part of that cycle of life. And so our individual experience in the landscape will be a fleck of time in the scheme of the universe. And I imagine the more you look at this, the more colours that you see in the landscape. Not only the range of greens, but the different tones of yellow and gold. So those unique Australian colours of green and gold are very ever present here. Before I reveal the title of the work, I'm going to invite you to perhaps share a title that you think is appropriate for this painting.
Jen, note, it seems very Australian.
One of the comments that artists who had come from Europe often noted about the Australian landscape was that with the Australian trees, when you looked through them, you could always see the sky through the branches and the leaves. And this lone eucalyptus tree just off centre really displays that, a unique Australian flora that is really the star of this painting.
We have some comments from Sydney. When you have a viewpoint that looks to the Western Plains over to the faint blue mountains range, you have a beautiful sense of scape, of proportion, of vastness and one's place in it. And then we have some suggested titles. One, Looking East. The landscape looks worn and ancient. The new growth is an interesting contrast. A couple of other titles, View to the City, Standing Tall, Serenity at Dusk, Being Alone. Beautiful titles.
They are beautiful titles.
We have a comment from one, looks like Port Botany, Dusk at Port Botany.
This work also gives me a sense of the long history of the Australian landscape, a landscape that has been managed by the Indigenous people for centuries, thousands of years. And as we look into the distance, we see a transition in the Sydney landscape. So it gives a sense of past, present, and imagined future. I'm going to reveal the artist and the title. And before I do that, I just want to draw your attention to the intricate details that we've been observing. This painting is almost a photographic record. The intricate details of the structure of the eucalypts, of the shrubs, that sense of changing colour and texture. The artist has obviously spent many, many hours immersed in this landscape, observing, processing and understanding. with the objective of reproducing for everyone to enjoy. So the artist here is an English-born artist, Hunt, and rightly so, there's a few people who observed that this was a view of Sydney from the North Shore, and it was painted in 1888. So well over 120 years old. I think it's almost 140 years old. It's quite a large oil painting, 92 by 168.8 centimetres. So this is a grand panoramic view in oils that is a homage to the Australian landscape and atmosphere. Ironically, there was also an alternative title for this artwork, and if my memory serves me right, I think it was called Evening View. But again, if you saw a sunrise, in our experience in this moment, that is totally fine as well.
We had another title come in, Early Evening, Sydney Bay.
Yes, I think it's that dappled light and that mauve and orange. And it's interesting again that we're looking to Sydney and we see this historic skyline just starting to emerge. Hope this inspires some people perhaps on the weekend to venture out. We're going to transition to our second work, which is quite different. So before we start talking about this piece and exploring it, I'd like you to take note of your bodily presence at the moment. And imagine that you're seated here in this landscape or seascape, and you're looking out and able to take in the sea air. To be aware of your posture. To imagine that perhaps you're sitting on that sand. What would it feel like? The sand amongst your toes, the breeze on your face, and the sun on your face. We invite you to look closely at the painting, and perhaps with this work we'll start in the distance. If we look into the distance, we see the rock cliff, the sandstone, and the shrubs above. We imagine that perhaps this cove experiences intense breezes and wind. And we can imagine that because of the angle of the two eucalypt trees that are angled to the left. The landscape gives us a sense of continuity, of the cycle of the waves, the erosion of the cliffs, and those large trees growing over the decades battling the harsh wind. The figures in the artwork, the figures in the far distance, they're just a flick of paint, a dab, appear small and distant. Where the figures walking towards us appear more formed, and we can make out two figures in the mid-ground with parasols, and the figures closest to us with the lady with the olive green dress, and broad brim hat that appears to be holding her hand out to a child dressed in white. I'm sure many of us can relate to the experience of immersing yourself in a seascape or beach scene, perhaps on summer holidays, which is so part of the Australian way of life.
Michael suggests that the figures also bend slightly to the left, subjected to the same forces as the trees.
I do agree with that. I imagine that that parasol perhaps is being blown back. For many of us who've experienced walking along a beach, the feeling of the sea breeze, the taste of the salt on your lips, the feeling of the water touching your feet as you walk along is so grounding and shocks you sometimes with the cold to being totally present. On this particular day, it doesn't seem like a 30-degree summer's day. It seems to be quite mild. I want to invite you to create a narrative to accompany this work. Perhaps to imagine yourself as one of the characters, or perhaps yourself walking into the work and encountering the people within it.
It's interesting, Danielle, being from Toronto and not having easy access to beaches. I do have to say it totally resonates with me in terms of that immersion in, in artwork such as this, where you could actually feel as if you're being there. I totally understand that, particularly if you don't have easy access. We have a comment. I think that it is still early afternoon. As you walk along the sand that slants down towards the slope, your body naturally leans uphill instinctively to counter this.
That's a beautifully imagined poetic piece. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, the artwork is a two-dimensional still image. But with our imagination, we can imagine the waves rolling in and the sound that these very low, gentle waves would be having as they come up and lap along the beach.
We have a comment. It looks as if all of the characters in the scene are women and girls.
Definitely, the ones in the foreground seem to be women with fully dressed and arms covered. So perhaps it relates to the period of time when the painting was created. And I imagine, depending on the narrative that you're creating in your mind, the figures in the far distance to me seem like some of them are actually in the water. So I'm imagining a mixture of men and women fully dressed with woolen swimmers, or togs, as they used to call them, in the water there, perhaps frolicking and going out into the surf.
We have a couple of other narratives, Danielle. From Anne, strolling along the foreshore, passing two women and a child. Beyond the creek, a group of paddlers. The sea breeze is coming up. And from Sandra, I love that the color chosen is yellow and sandy color, including the seawater, which peculiarly would be how I feel being around the water in the summer, but not what I see, which tends to be turquoise blue.
It's a lovely comment. And I'm glad you mentioned that the highlight of those golden tones, the tones of amber, the brassiness here, where the artist is ever present here. The artist has immersed themselves in this landscape with these sketchy-like brush strokes.
Michael says, I think this scene captures the transition between a rain shower and the sun coming out. Look at the shadows emerging.
Oh, that's a wonderful observation. It's a lovely observation. And yes, that often when you're at the beach and the weather can be so changeable, and one of the joys of being in the outdoors is having to become flexible and go with the flow in a way. And I feel that these characters here are immersed in nature and observing, experiencing, and again being very mindful. I'd like to again draw your attention to the way this has been painted. The previous work was meticulously documenting the structure of the plants, documenting the variation of colour and texture, where here it seems to be almost slightly hazy, but perhaps more immediate, where the artist is really capturing those muted colours that perhaps they're noting in this overcast day. And use the brilliant white to highlight the reflection. Such a simple painting, but so powerful in its beauty. Again, I hope you've imagined yourself within the landscape. We walk through the Australian bush, and here we've walked along a seascape and had the sensory experience of the water on our feet, smelling the salt air. And perhaps connecting with some of those memories of summer holidays, perhaps with family and friends, or even school, things like school camps, those sort of adventures of endless time. I'm going to ask you to take note of anything that you think is missing from this painting. In 2021, when you traverse the beach, is there anything that you often see that we don't see here?
I think that the haziness you speak of, Danielle, comes from the bright light of the Australian high afternoon in a glary, sandy, protected cove. It is a light factor that Europeans remarked upon when they experienced Australian light.
That is a superb comment. And when we reveal the artist, we will see why that beautiful comment resonates so well.
In terms of something missing, we have seagulls.
Oh, that's true. There's no fish and chips here, so no seagulls. Yeah.
And we have, from Anne, boats, dogs, picnics, beach towels missing, tents. And Anne notes that the child is supremely uninterested in the water.
Yes, probably.
No, oh, sorry. No high rises.
They're great observations. Often when we imagine an Australian beach scene, we might imagine some flags or, as mentioned, beach towels. But it just goes to show the different approaches to social norms of sunbaking and taking time out in the sun.
We also have no plastic, no roads or cars.
Exactly. It's a pristine environment. And I just make those comments so to attune your eye to perhaps the period of time that we're looking at, perhaps a simpler period of time, a less complicated. And so
we have a couple of, we have a couple of other comments. Sorry, I just don't want to miss them. We wouldn't see smoke rising from a singular homestead on the hill from our harbour beaches in 2020. We have a comment from Michael, the sun is missing, but it's there just out of the picture, top right. Mm-hmm. From Megan, no flags, lifeguards, shops and cafes around the beach. There's a feeling of being with nature in a more pure sense. Mm. And then we have Catherine again, fuel stove in the home.
Yes. They're wonderful, very astute observations, especially that house upon the ridge there with the plumes coming into the sky. So I'm going to reveal the artist and the title. So it's the artist Nerli, who originated from Italy in the late 19th century, who came to Australia and immersed himself in the Australian landscape. And what we're experiencing here is a beach scene from Sandringham in Port Phillip Bay in Melbourne. And so the comment of the quality of the Australian light being so impressionable on European artists is exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing an Italian artist who comes to to the southern continents and notices this quality of light and quality in the natural environment. I'll also draw your attention to the size of the painting. It's 23.2 centimetres by 31.4 centimetres. So it's a fairly small painting, about that large. And so I want you to imagine that Nurli is on Sandringham Beach with an easel, with his palette and his box set of oil paints, and he's quickly sketching this composition. And so those wonderful cross-hatching marks and the broad brush strokes is a particular style that represents the artist being immersed in that landscape. That painting outdoors was a particular style that's often referred to as en plein air, which just means painting outdoors. And so it has that energy of capturing the light and the atmosphere without being overworked or over fussy. So again, a beautiful, very humble scene, but I hope it's given you immense joy and pleasure by looking. So our third work is a very different work. It will be another transition from our walk in the bush or our observations of looking out to a panorama to here, to walking along a beach, feeling the sand, smelling the air, to now being immersed in a landscape. I'm going to invite you to take a few moments to view the artwork. To notice the marks that have been made. The way the artist has communicated their physical presence in the landscape. How this is almost a record of an artist being immersed in a landscape, observing closely, understanding, processing, and then developing a visual language. To communicate what that environment or space means to the artist.
Mahima notes it feels like a little orderly version of Pollak.
Yes, interesting comment.
We have some other comments. Scribbly gums. Natalie says it reminds me of a birch tree's bark. Catherine, it looks like rain on water or falling down on an expanse of glass.
They're beautiful comments, and I can really see the reference to the scribbly gums and the bark of a tree, definitely. And the comment of raindrops on the water is very interesting here.
We also have Sandra saw boats docked at beach or lotus stalks past its prime in summer. Anne, reeds reflected in water, and Pip, reflections in shallow water.
Thank you for sharing those, Catherine, because all those comments that people have shared about water, creeks, is perfectly attuned with what you're looking at. What I want you to imagine is that you're moving through water. I want you to imagine perhaps that you're in a boat and you're looking down into the water, and you're seeing the movement, the ripples, and feeling your body handling those oars and connecting and immersing yourself in the landscape, or in this instance, a waterscape.
I have another interesting comment. Well, it looks like a reflection of scrubby landscape in a still pool of water. It reminds me of calligraphy, Japanese writing, vertically cursive.
That's a wonderful comment. The artist has been documented in expressing their particular interest, their long time fascination with Chinese calligraphy. And that although this is a drawing, they have referenced the energy where an artist will transfer energy from their body through those mark-making designs. So yes, I do agree, and the artist does mention their fascination with Chinese calligraphy and the fact that this is the format here, this horizontal format, does draw attention that it's similar to a scroll. And again, the comments about the reflection upon the water is spot on here. It almost looks like calligraphic shorthand. And you can imagine the artist moving across this surface with a piece of graphite and really processing the marks that they're making. And probably what's really important here is what the artist has left out. The artist has just placed in the marks that they feel are essential. They've pared back. They've really processed and understood this landscape. They've been immersed in it many, many times. And so they've been able to, a little bit like poetry, to reduce it to its essential marks.
Got some other lovely comments coming in, Danielle. Mahima says she also sees the top layer of water a bit like how Monet would do it. Michael comments, reeds rising above the water surface, soft and strong. And Diane, for Diane, it reminds her of work by Lois Connor, photographer who does similar work in China, reflections paired back in water.
So quite meditative type works. I'm going to share with you the artist, materials, and the scale of this work. So the artist here is the Australian artist, Anna Pollak. And the title of this work is Mullet Creek. And Mullet Creek is in the Hawkesbury, about I'd say an hour north of, or maybe 45 minutes north of Hornsby. And Pollak actually lives on Dangar Island. And she's lived there for many, many years. And her experience of the landscape and the waterscape is part of her everyday life there on Dangar Island, where she immerses herself in a small dinghy or rowboat, and she rows regularly along Mullet Creek and the Hawkesbury waterways. And those reflections that we see in the water are actually oyster farms. And so what we're looking at, that it could be reeds and the oyster leases that she's rowing through. And as she rows, there are days there she has mentioned that she just looks and observes, and she feels a connection with the environment through the extension of the paddle. And on other days, she takes art materials into the boat and sketchbooks, and she sketches the scenes that she sees. And every time she looks out into the water and at these oyster leases, every scene is different because every moment of light reflects differently. The scale of this work is 100 centimetres high by 2.5 centimetres wide, so almost 2.5 metres. So it's this expansive long scroll. And this work she's made back in the studio on Dangar Island, where she has gone through her sketchbooks and again observed and reduced to the essential marks. So again, I hope you felt immersed in this watery landscape. So instead of just looking at or walking upon, we were immersed in the creek here. I'm going to go to our comparison slide. And look at the journey that we immersed ourselves in today. So we started off with a realistic portrayal of the Australian bush, where we looked out into the distance. We had a sense of the past, the present scene of the 1880s, looking out into visions of the future for Sydney. We then transitioned to Sandringham Beach, seascape. We're experiencing in the intense breeze of the water, the salty air and the sand on our feet. And then with Pollak's drawing, we shared her experience of being on Mullet Creek in her dinghy and getting that essential elements of what we would see and experience. So we're going to invite you to perhaps share with us which of the three works in particular resonated with you most today. And I imagine that if you perhaps did this experience on another day, perhaps a different work would resonate with you. Well, that's interesting. So we have 52% of people really connecting with the Mullet Creek work. And I wonder if beings of the 21st century, whether we really resonate with Pollak's approach to documenting a scene, giving us a poetic experience to immerse ourselves in.
We have an interesting comment from Michael with respect to Mullet Creek. He says the use of rice paper is interesting and suggests the stillness of rice paddies.
It's a wonderful comment, an observation. Thank you for sharing that. It's going to try to transition to our next slide. There we are. So we invite you to create a creative response to the themes that we've explored in this session. So if you're inspired today, perhaps to take a walk, and on your walk today, perhaps you could take a photograph of a scene, or if you have a small sketchbook, sketch an environment that you see, your local park or bush trail, or if you're lucky enough to be near a water view, or even paint or write a piece exploring the theme of immersion in a natural environment where you feel a personal connection. And we would love to see your responses, and you're very welcome to email culturedose@blackdog.org.au, because we will get a sense of how you've engaged with the program. The Art Gallery of New South Wales on our website, and it will be linked to the Culture Dose page on the Black Dog Institute, will create an art set of these 3 artworks, which you'll be able to explore and revisit in your own time, and hopefully lead others in a similar experience. So on behalf of the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Black Dog Institute, we'd like to thank you for taking time out today, and we hope that we leave you feeling perhaps more refreshed and in tune. So we hope that our session has allowed you to be present, to consider the creative processes in our lives, and that connect us with the unique visions that the 3 artists have shared about the world today. And as in the previous sessions, a survey will pop up in your browser in a few moments. And we would really appreciate it if you had a few moments to share your experience, so we can learn and develop this program further. So from myself, thank you very much, and I hopefully will see you again.
Yes, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.